Hi, I want to help you review the steps in rounding. So let's take a look at some of the tools that we can use to help us remember the steps. So here's the song, If You're Rounding and You Know It. And you can see here that it says, if you're rounding and you know it, then your pencil will surely show it. And we definitely want to use our pencil or our whiteboard marker to record the steps as we go. And when we are doing the place value song, we want to start with the place value song, and then we want to mark the place that we're rounding to. And you'll mark that with your pencil or your whiteboard marker. And the next step after that is to look to the right to see the right neighbor. We'll practice these steps together. And then the next thing we want to remember is that if the right neighbor is 5 or greater, you're going to round up in the rounding place. If the right neighbor is 5 or greater, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, then you'll round up in the rounding place. If it's 4 or less, leave it alone. That means that when you look to the right neighbor, if the right neighbor is 4 or less, 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0, then you're going to round down. That means that you're going to leave this rounding place alone. Leave it alone. And then if you have numbers on the left of the rounding place, everything on the left stays the same. And everything to the right of the rounding place becomes a 0. So we're going to use these steps to help us with rounding. Let's practice. So I'm going to start here, and the instructions say, round each number to the nearest 100. So let's take a look at number 1. I want to round to the nearest 100. I'm going to use the place value song to help me. Place value, place value, place value line, moving to the left. I'll know them every time. Ones, tens, hundreds. I'm stopping at the hundreds place, and I'm going to mark the hundreds place because I'm rounding to the nearest 100. And the song says to me to hop to the right, to look at the right neighbor, to see what to do next. So I'm looking at the right neighbor, and I'm trying to draw an arrow that points at the 9 in the tens place, and I didn't do a very good job because of this. It's not easy to write with. So I'm going to just point at the number 9. So the number 9 is in the tens place. I'm going to look to the right at the right neighbor. And now I'm thinking about that number in the 9 in the tens place. And I know that it's 5 or greater. This 9 is greater than 5. So that means I'm going to round up. I'm going to round up, and that 7 becomes an 8. And the song tells me that after I do that, everything to the right becomes a 0. So let's do another one. I'm rounding to the nearest 100. I'm going to go to number 2, and I see that I have the hundreds place, and in the hundreds place is the digit 1. So that's 100. And the song tells me to look to the right, to look at the right neighbor, and if this number is 5 or greater, I'm going to round up. And that 8 is bigger than a 5. So the hundreds place rounds up. I'm rounding to the nearest hundreds, so the hundreds place rounds up. And in this case, the 100 becomes 200. And the song reminds me that everything to the right becomes a 0. Those are 2 zeros there. Okay? Now we're going to skip number 3 because number 3 is also going to round up. And I want to go to number 4 because it rounds down. So let's take a look at number 4. I'm rounding to the nearest hundreds. Ones, tens, hundreds. Use my pencil and mark the hundreds place. And now I'm going to look to the right to see the right neighbor. It's the correct neighbor to look at. And I can see that it's a 3. And I remember the song says, if this is 4 or less, leave the rounding place alone. If this is 4 or less, leave the rounding place alone. So that 3 in the hundreds place is going to stay a 3 in the hundreds place. And the song says, everything to the right becomes a 0. So, as a quick review of the song, if I'm rounding and I know it, then my pencil will surely show it. I will use the place value song and mark the rounding place. Then I look to the right to see the right neighbor. And if the right neighbor is 5 or greater, the rounding place goes up. If the right neighbor is 4 or less, I leave the rounding place alone. And then from there, everything on the left side of the rounding place stays the same. And everything to the right of the rounding place becomes a 0. So that was a quick review of our steps. And let's do another one. I'm going to look at some bigger numbers now. And it still says to round to the nearest 100. So I'm still thinking about the hundreds. Let me get my pen. Let's do number 1. So I'm rounding to the nearest hundreds. I see 5,289. And I'm going to round to the nearest hundreds. So I'll use the place value song to find the hundreds place. Place value line. Moving to the left, I'll know them every time. Ones, tens, hundreds. The 2 is in the hundreds place, and my pencil will surely show it. And now I hop to the right, I look to the right neighbor, and I see an 8. And this 8 is bigger than 5. This 8 is strong. It's going to say to the number 2, round up. So this 200 is going to round up to 300. I'm just going to come over here and write that 3. It belongs in the hundreds place. I'm not done yet. Now the song says, everything to the right becomes a 0. So this 8 tens and this 9 ones becomes a 0. 0, 0. I'm not done yet. So this 289 has become 300. The song also says, everything to the left stays the same. Everything to the left stays the same. So I'm going to put a 5 right there. And I'm going to put my comma. So 5,289 rounds to 5,300 when I round to the nearest hundreds place. Okay, let's do one more. I want to jump down to number 3. And again, I'm rounding to the nearest hundreds, so I count over ones, tens, hundreds, and I use my pencil to surely show I'm in the hundreds. And I'm going to hop to the right and look at the right neighbor, and I see a 4. And I remember the song says, if it's 4 or less, leave the rounding place alone. So that 4 is not very strong. It's going to talk to the 1. It's going to say, 1, stay the same. We're going to leave the 1 alone because the 4 is weak. So I'm going to go ahead and write 1 for 100. The song says everything to the right becomes a 0. Well, there's a 10 that's going to be a 0 and a 1s that's going to be a 0. So this part of the number rounds down to 100. And the song says everything to the left stays the same. So I keep that 7. Okay. I hope that this review helps you. I want you to complete this page and turn it in to me. Okay?